Okay, so now I explain the code. So when you write npm start, the shell process reaches this file right here, okay, and it creates a new process. You can see all the information that this process has by console logging process itself. So I have done some important console logs here. So this you can see the process ID, you can see the process parent ID, you can see the current working directory of your project. So from which directory did you write npm start? You can see that over here, and also you can see the binary file that was used to execute this code. In our case, we use the node binary because of this, and you can also see the script or program being executed. In our case, we are executing this file right here, and any arguments passed. So in we passed, the only argument we passed was start. So now if I go to the terminal and if I just write npm start, I'm gonna write cat again. Otherwise, when the website starts, the console logs get cleared. Okay, so as you can see, you can get the process ID. You can get information of the process in general, like the process ID, parent ID, the working directory of your project. So this is where you call. So you call npm start from this directory. So you also receive. So your process also receives information of that directory, and also you get the binary that was used to execute this file. You get the current file being run and the arguments passed. So you also get the execution path variable, which is the same as the one over here. And this code is executed in the next file. So ignore this for now. So this is the information we can get from the process. So the process is a big object and it has a lot of other key value pairs. This is some of the information I got from the process. Is uses this information and gets some more information. So it's able to create a new process which is going to run React script start. So in this file we call this, which is basically this file right here, and we pass a parameter, so basically calling a function. And if I go here and see module.exports, so we are basically over here we are exporting a function, and what that function does is it calls validate engines. So when we do this, we are basically calling validate engines. So let's go to validate engines. So what validate engines basically does to stop npm from running an unsupported version and give any error instead of crashing. And then at the end of validate engines, we call this function, which is basically the second parameter over here. And the second parameter we passed is this file, entry.js. So we call entry.js, to which we pass the process information. Then we pass like the node version, npm version. And now we go to this file. So inside this file, we get the command and the arguments from the process. So what's a command and what's an argument? So normally the format is npm command arguments. So if we just write npm start, in this case, start is the command and arguments is empty. If we had written npm run start, then run would be the command and start would be the argument. So in our case, command is equal to start and our arguments is an empty array, which is what we saw over here, as you can see. So our command is start and our arguments is empty, and then basically you go down and call npm. What's npm? Npm is basically an instance of this class. This class is basically this file right over here, which is this. So we are basically calling the exec function of this class right here. So the exec function of this class is right here. So over here we call this function and pass to it the command, which was start, and arguments, which was an empty array. So this is what's being called, and what happens here is important. We call this .constructor.cmd, I would just call it command, and pass to it the parameter start. So what happens here? we go all the way up here. Sorry. So we go all the way up here and execute this function. And what it does is basically it gets the command C and it basically returns a file, a class. So it returns a file which exists in the folder commands, and would return the file start because command maps to start. So if you look over here, inside command we have all these files. So if you had written npm login, it would have returned this file. But now you have written npm start, so it's going to return this file right here. Start is basically a class over here. So it returns the start class. So if we go back right here, this is going to return the start class. So this is basically the start class, and this command is an instance of the class start. In other words, what we are basically doing is this: const command is equal to new start. We are basically calling this. So the command right here is an instance of the class start. Okay, so now in this function we end up calling command.exec. So we reach here, and then we see that this goes to false. Why is it false and not true? Because it's only set to true if we had workspace written in our arguments or command, and we don't. We just wrote npm start. If we had written workspace in our arguments, this would be set to true and we would execute this code. But we did not do that, so we are going to execute this code. What was command here? Command was start. So we basically run the exec function in the class start. So if we go to the class start, we see that there is no exec function, which means it's going to run the exec function from its parent class. So if we go to the parent class, we see that there is indeed an exec function, and what it returns is it calls this.npm.exec, passes in the first parameter, it passes run, and in the second parameter, it's going to pass start. This evaluates to start. And then we go back to this function because it's being called again. So we go back all the way here to this function, it's being called again. This time we call it again. But this time the command is not start, the command is run. So run is being passed over here. And then all the way up here, so this time over here we return the run.javascript file, not start.javascript, which is basically this file right here. So this time what happens is the two lines basically mean we are calling const we are basically calling this. So we are creating an instance of class run script. Now what's going to happen is that we are going to call the exec function inside run script this time, not start. So if we go to run, over here we do have an exec function. So now in the class run script, in this exec function we have argument as an array called start, and we call this.run. To it we pass the argument array start, and we also pass the path, which the path here is basically our current working directory, from the directory where we call npm start. So now I will console log the path here, and if I just do clear, so as you can see the path is basically, so as you can see the path is a directory from which I called npm start, the same directory as here. Now before we continue, what does this mean? This basically means that whatever array you are passing over here, the first element will be event, and the rest of the elements would be an array. So for example, if you had 4 elements, event would be the first element, and the rest 3 elements would be an array. So a good example would be if you had passed a b c, then events is equal to a and arguments is equal to b comma c. So in this case, because we pass only start as an array, event is start and arguments is basically an empty array. So now what happens in this function? In this function, using the path, we get the package.json file, and inside the package.json, we get the scripts. What is the script? It's basically, it's best if I show it. So as you can see, this is the scripts inside package.json, where we have the start command, which maps to React script start. Now, before we call the next file run script, I want to quickly talk about what happens here. So over here, the events is equal to event, which is start, and arguments, which is an empty array. So that would basically be start, comma, empty array. Now what happens here is that if you had, so in npm, in package.json, you can write pre-start, and for any command you can have a pre and a post. So you can have pre-start and post-start. And what that basically does is before executing start, it executes pre-start. And after start has been executed, you can execute for post-start. So if you want to have that flexibility, you can do that in package.json, in the package.json file, in the scripts tag, in the scripts option, but we do not do that. So for us, this would be skipped. And then we call events. It loops, but for us the loop would just run once. So for us, ev is the start event and ev arguments is an empty array. And then we also pass the path, which is the path to the project directory, and we also pass package.json file. So now we go to run script. Run script is basically this file over here, and that's this. Now this code here validates your settings, cleans up your package.json file if needed, and then hands it off to the actual execution engine, which is this run script package. Now over here is where the actual mapping happens. What do I mean by that? So over here we run this part of the code, and it says that if we have package, this is the package.json file, if the package.json file has a scripts object, which it does, and inside the scripts object there's the key start, then make command equal to React script start. So this would basically equate to this piece of code right here, because it says package.scripts, which gives us access to this whole object, and then it says event, which is start. So as an output we will get this. So this command here is basically React script start. The new process that will be created will have this as its command. Now this is very important because this function has multiple purposes, but one of its purpose is to create a path environment variable for our new process. So I show that over here. So this function here returns spawn options, and I will show you the path environment variable for the spawn options. This path environment variable will be passed to the new process which will be created in the next call. So now if I run console log with npm start, so this, as you can see, is the path environment variable for the new process. There's so many paths over here, and the most important one, which I was talking about, is the node modules folder in our project directory. And it's because how npm works when trying to add path variables for node modules. It first looks at node modules in the current directory, then it gets node modules from the parent directory, and it keeps on doing this recursive step until it reaches the root. And of course, in the path environment variables, it will also include the node executable, because in order to execute React scripts, you need the node binary. So now let's see what else is being returned. So we also have spawn shell and spawn arguments. If we uncommented, and as you can see, spawn shell is basically React script start. So the mapping has happened, and now we will pass this to the next process, which is going to execute React script start. The arguments array is empty. So finally we call this function to create a new process. We pass in it React script start, arguments is empty, so an empty array, and spawn options. This contains all the information that the new process needs, including this information, which is the path variable. All right, so now let's go to the promise spawn function, which is inside this index.js file. And over here, in the end, over here, we basically create the new process. We have passed all the relevant information. Let's have a look at what the command and arguments are. So as you can see, the command over here is React script starts, arguments is empty. Now, as you know, in order to execute React script start in the Linux terminal, you need to write something like this is what you need to write. This is what you need to write, and these are the arguments. This is the command, and these are the arguments. But right now your command is React script start and your argument is empty. So it's the job of this function to return something like this. And we go to this function, and what it does is first, if command, so this evaluates to true, and then we go to process, we check the platform. If it's Windows, we use this, but if it's Linux, in our case, we put command as sh, and we return this command right here. And in real arguments, we add this, we add that C, and we also add script, which is basically React scripts start. So this is what we return in real arguments. We push, so we return this as an array with each of them being an element. And we return options as is, but this time, and for options, we set shell to false. And why do we do that? Because when we go back to this function, so as you can see, we call promise spawn. So when we go back to this function, this time this will evaluate to false. So we will not run this. And you will notice now that if I console log, then you'll see the new command and arguments. And as you can see, the new command and arguments are what we wanted. The command is sh, and the arguments are an array containing the C and React script start. This is exactly what's needed in order to run a Linux command. So now we go to this line over here where we finally pass the command, the arguments, and the options. Remember, options has all the information the process needs, one of them being the path variables. And the path variables contains the root to React scripts. So we finally create a new process which will execute that command, and that will go to React scripts, and it will run this part of the code, and then it's going to reach here, and as explained in previous parts, this is going to create another process, and we will go to the file scripts / start.javascript, and we end up here. Over here we'll run webpack dev server, ESLint, Chokidar, and this is basically the entire workflow. Now before we end, I want to show you what happens when we have written npm start. Our website is running. Now I make some changes to the code and I click Ctrl S, and that updates the code. So basically Chokidar is waiting for any changes being made in the code. Once a change is made in the code, Chaukidar signals to rebundle. The rebundling happens and the website reloads. When this rebundling happens, obviously this takes some of the CPU units, and I want to show that. So over here, if I, yes, our website is running right now. So if I call htop, and now I want to show you what happens when I make a change to the code and click Ctrl S. Okay, so right now this is my project I've been working on, and I wrote npm start in this directory, which will execute this node modules, and this node module should have React scripts in it. So I just want to show you what happens if I make a change to code. So if I call app. So if I make some change to code here, now see what happens when I click Ctrl S. If I go to htop, so now if I click save, the CPU units over here should increase. As you can see, as soon as I click Ctrl S, the CPU units increase. If I'll show it again, so when I click Ctrl S, this circle over here disappears. So that's when I click it, so you can check. As you can see, as soon as I clicked it, the CPU units increase. And why did it increase? Because at that time, Chaukidar gets the signal that the file has been saved, so it instructs Webpack to rebundle. And that is it. Thank you for watching. And now in the next video, I will talk about what was the point of me explaining all this. Why would this be helpful in certain situations?